Hey, in part 4 of the IELTS listening exam, you will need to listen to a lecture of about 6 or 7 minutes and answer 10 questions based on what you hear. In the past, for example, if you look at Cambridge books 6, 7 or 8, the type of questions you got in listening part 4 changed. One test you may have multiple choice questions, in the next test you may have box matching, and in another test you may have sentence completion. However, in the last 4 or 5 years, probably from around book 11, you can see that the only type of question that IELTS gives now in listening part 4 is note completion. And I think this is fantastic news for IELTS test takers, because if you can learn to follow the notes, I actually think that even relatively weak listeners should be able to get very high scores in part 4. And if you're a good listener, if you're a nice student who's aiming to go to Canada with an 8777, this is the part of the test where you should be aiming for a 10. So, who wants to learn how to follow the notes? I do. Let's go. Alright, so to help me teach you how to follow notes, why don't we bring onto the board the notes from Cambridge 15 Test 3 Part 4. As I said before, notes are our friends. The more notes you have, the better. Why is that? Well, pretty much I think of notes as scaffolding. You know those poles that they put up outside of buildings when they're constructing them to support the building? Well, in a similar way, all of these notes are going to support you in your listening. The first and most important thing about notes are the headings. And look at all the wonderful headings that we have here. Headings are fantastic because they can help you find your way back if you get lost in the lecture. For example, here, if you got lost while the lecturer is talking about ancient Greece, although you may have to abandon 1 or 2 questions, all you have to do is sit and calmly wait for them to talk about Germany, and then you are back and you can start listening to the lecture again. Think of headings a bit like, you know, those tour guides that you see walking around cities with the umbrellas so you can always see them. That's what headings should be as you're listening. They are literally the basic structure of the lecture, and anytime you get lost, go to the next heading, sit and wait. The lecturer will always use those key words from the headings. However, it's not just headings that can help you find your way back or follow the lecture. In many notes, there are also subheadings. Now, actually, in this exam, the subheadings don't really appear until the final section, but have a look. Look at all of those wonderful dates. We've got the 1600s, 1791, the early 1800s, the late 1800s. Those are clearly marking different points in the lecture, and you should definitely use them as you listen. So headings and subheadings, as I said, they're really your markers or your way back if you get lost. But it's not really the headings that are the most useful things. What's much more useful are the actual notes themselves. And as I said, the more words you have in your notes, the easier it's going to be for you to follow the lecture and find the answer. Do you know the story of Hansel and Gretel, the fairy tale of the boy and the girl who go into the forest, and to help find their way back, they drop little pieces of bread or breadcrumbs that they can use to follow? That's what the note should be for you. As you're listening, you should simply be following line for line every single one of the notes. You are always going to hear every single word in those notes. That is so important. It means that if the lecturer adds extra details, you don't need to worry. You just keep focusing on the notes. And as you start to hear key words or synonyms around the missing words, that is going to help guide you, like the breadcrumbs, to find them. So what I always recommend to my students as they're training, it doesn't matter if they're a computer-based student or a paper-based student, is get a Cambridge book and a pencil. As you listen to the lecture, underline all of the words as you hear them. We're going to go line by line through the notes. We're not only listening for the lines that have got the missing words, we're listening for every line, because if we follow the notes, we should find the answer. You'll probably find a gap where the answer will be, and it should be pretty obvious what the missing word is. As a demonstration, why don't we do the first 5 questions in this lecture now? We don't need to do all 10 for copyright reasons, and I will be you, the student, okay? I'm going to underline all of the words as I hear them, and all you need to do is tell me what are the first 5 answers. What are the missing words? Are you ready? Let's get listening. Off we go.
Part 4. You will hear part of a lecture on the early history of keeping clean.
Nowadays, we use different products for personal cleanliness, laundry, dishwashing and household cleaning, but this is very much a 20th century development. The origins of cleanliness date back to prehistoric times. Since water is essential for life, the earliest people lived near water and knew something about its cleansing properties, at least that it rinsed mud off their hands. During the excavation of ancient Babylon, evidence was found that soap making was known as early as 2800 BC. Archaeologists discovered cylinders made of clay, with inscriptions on them saying that fats were boiled with ashes. This is a method of making soap, though there's no reference to the purpose of this material. The early Greeks bathed for aesthetic reasons and apparently didn't use soap. Instead, they cleaned their bodies with blocks of sand, pumice and ashes, then anointed themselves with oil and scraped off the oil and dirt with a metal instrument known as a strigil. They also used oil mixed with ashes. Clothes were washed without soap in streams. The ancient Germans and Gauls are also credited with discovering how to make a substance called soap, made of melted animal fat and ashes. They used this mixture to tint their hair red. Soap got its name, according to an ancient Roman legend, from Mount Sapo, where animals were sacrificed, leaving deposits of animal fat. Rain washed these deposits, along with wood ashes, down into the clay soil along the river Tiber. Women found that this mixture greatly reduced the effort required to wash their clothes. As Roman civilization advanced, so did bathing. The first of the famous Roman baths, supplied with water from their aqueducts, was built around 312 BC. The baths were luxurious, and bathing became very popular. And by the 2nd century AD, the Greek physician Galen recommended soap for both medicinal and cleansing purposes.
All right, can you see what I'm trying to teach you, right? By underlining all of the words as we heard them, I hope you should have been able to find these answers pretty easily. So let's go through them quickly together. Question 31, water was used to wash off mud. Question 32, where was this soap-like material found? It was found in clay cylinders. Make sure you've spelt that one correctly. For question 33, our strigil, doesn't matter what that is, was made of metal. Question 34, in ancient Germany, they used soap to colour their hair. And finally, the water was carried to Roman baths. I hope that you managed to find those answers with my support, but what's more important, I think, is that we now look at some of the tricks that IELTS uses during these notes to confuse you. The tricks that they play that can make it hard for you to find the missing word. So the first trick is kind of obvious and pretty simple, but it's simply that you don't always hear exactly the same words that are written in the notes. Very often what we hear are synonyms. Can you remember any synonyms that we heard for the notes in this listening. For example, they didn't say wash off mud, did they? Does anyone remember the verb? It was rinsed. In the same way, for question 34, the lecturer didn't use the words colour their hair, they used the more complicated paraphrase tint their hair. So that's the first thing you need to be aware of. What we should be listening for is not always keywords, we should be listening for meaning. So we should know that tint and colour or wash off and rinse have got the same meaning, so they're not the answers, but they're showing us that the answer is close. The second trick that IELTS exam writers use for note completion questions is the position of the key words. You may have noticed that for some of the questions, and these are the more difficult questions, the key word that signified the answer was coming did not appear before the missing word, but after. Do you remember which question that happened in? Yes, it was question 32. The word cylinder is after the space, but we heard cylinder before we heard the word clay. So they're playing with the word order here to try to confuse you. In a similar way, sometimes a keyword is printed before the missing word, but we don't hear it until after the answer has been given. For example, in question 33, we were listening, what is this strigil made of? But we heard the word metal before we heard the word strigil. So you've got to be able to connect the metal that you heard earlier as the answer for the strigil. That's a more complicated type of listening. So be aware that IELTS is playing with the word order of the key words and the answers. The third and final trick, and this is the one which I don't think many students are aware of, but can cause a great amount of stress in the exam, is that sometimes the lecturer will go off on what we call a tangent, right? On a completely different direction which is not shown on the notes. They can talk and talk and talk, and if you're not confident in your listening, as the lecturer is talking about something you can't see on the notes, you might panic and you might think you've lost your place. Don't panic. Be patient. For example, here, after question 35, the lecturer went on and on about someone called Gallon. There's no Gallon in these notes. That is fine. Learn to be patient. When you hear the lecturer keep talking about something not on the notes, do what I do, which is just think blah, 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 and wait patiently until they come back to the next heading or the next note. Trust me, they always follow the order of the notes. So if you hear extra details, don't panic, just be confident and wait for the lecturer to come back and then continue. So, what do these tricks really mean for us as we're listening in part 4? Well, as we know that the examiners are going to play with the order of the key words and where the missing word is in the sentence, it really means you want to be aware of the whole sentence as you listen. If you're in the paper-based test, I'd recommend underlining the key words before the missing word and after, and kind of look for or listen for all of them, not just the ones before the space. Also, as I just said, it means don't panic. You are going to hear lots of extra information. So if suddenly the lecturer is speaking about something but you can't see it on the notes, that's the trick. That's where weak students get lost, but you're not a weak student. You've taken this lesson. You know what's going to happen. Just be patient. Before we finish, just so that we have kind of almost completely finished listening part 4, let's just think about the best way you can spend the minute you have before the lecture starts analysing the notes. The first thing you're going to do, as always, is check how many words you can use in your answer. Most of the time now, it's just 1. If it says 2, remember, that doesn't mean every answer will need 2 words. It just means that there is at least 1 that will require you to have 2 words. Once you've checked the words, I would then focus only on the sentences with the missing words. There are always extra notes. They are our friends. As we're listening to the lecture, we're going to be checking and listening for those and underlining them, but there's no need to look at those in the minute preparation. You want to focus on the sentences that have got missing information. Now, many teachers will tell you what you should do in the minute is predict the type of word that is missing. So, are you missing an adjective or a noun or a verb? 90% of the time now, in these types of listening activities, the type of word that's missing is simply a noun. Obviously, there's more than one type of noun, so you want to check, am I listening for a singular noun? If you've got the article a or an before the missing word, or there is a singular verb after the space. You may be able to identify that you're listening for a countable noun if you've got a quantifier like some before the space. That's definitely something you want to do. However, I think very good listeners shouldn't waste their energy thinking, what type of word am I listening for? Because that's not how we listen, right? When you're listening to your friend talking to you, you're not thinking noun, verb, adverb. You're listening for meaning. And I know from training hundreds of students, the students who do best in the minute, they read the sentence with the missing word and they understand it as a sentence, and then they just predict what word could meaningfully go into this sentence to complete it. Obviously, it's very unlikely you are 100% going to guess the right word, but for example, for question 31, water was used to wash off. A good listener will think, well, we wash off things we don't want. So what could it be? Blood? I don't know, something on our body that we don't want, dirt, mud. Pretty much the answer, I think, here could be predicted. So again, I'm not thinking wash off noun. I'm thinking, what would we want to wash off, particularly in prehistoric times? Don't just focus on the type of word, focus on the meaning. The more you can actually actively predict, the higher the chance you've got of hearing the answer. Because what's going to happen is, as you're listening, it's either going to confirm what you thought or it's going to contradict what you thought. But in any case, the prediction turns your listening from passive listening to active listening. And what we really want in IELTS always is active listening. So if until now you've been focused on the type of word, that's great. Obviously, the word we use in our answer has to be grammatically correct, but I would focus more on the meaning rather than the type of word. I think you'll find that will definitely help your listening a lot more. Then, in terms of actually writing the answers, the only other things I have to say are pretty obvious, but make sure your answer is spelt correctly. My advice would be, don't worry about spelling as you're listening. Write down what you think the word is or how you think you spell the word, and then focus on the spelling in the check time you have at the end. Sometimes the answers in the lecture can come in quick succession. You don't want to be thinking about spelling for question 37 and miss the answer to question 38. Focus on spelling in the check time or the review time. Also, the answer must always be a word that you heard exactly in the lecture. You must never change the word. This really is most important in terms of plurals. So for our question 35, the answer was baths, plural. If you wrote bath with no S, it would not be correct. You've got to start to train to listen for plurals. Some students struggle with that, so really focus. Did you hear the S at the end? Did you not hear the S at the end? What have we learned in this lesson? We have learned that section 4 of IELTS Listening is always an academic lecture, and right now, until they change the exam, the type of question you get is always going to be note completion. However, this is a very good thing. Why? Because they have headings that will help us find our way back if we get lost. And if you simply just follow the notes, you can use those notes like breadcrumbs to find the answers. However, be careful. Remember some key tricks that IELTS will use to confuse you. First, remember, you might hear a key word that comes after the space before the missing word. Okay, so as you're looking and listening for a sentence, look at the whole sentence, not just the words before the space. Also, remember that you're very likely to hear synonyms in place of keywords. So not wash off mud, rinse off mud. You've got to be listening for the meaning, not each word. But there will also be keywords or small headings that are there to guide you. The more you stick to the notes, the less you're going to get tricked. And remember, one of the new tricks that IELTS uses is adding sometimes 30 seconds of unnecessary information which are not on the notes. If that happens, be patient. Just keep focusing on the notes and thinking, I'm waiting for the next line. I'm waiting for the next line. I promise you it will come. Finally, don't make basic errors. Don't give IELTS points that you have won. Always check how many words you can use. 99% of the time, it's only going to be one word. If the instruction says 2 words, remember, not every answer will be 2 words, but at least one will. Obviously, spelling is important. That's more difficult. But if you have problems with spelling, that's something you should definitely try and work on. And finally, only use words that you hear directly in the lecture. Never change them. In particular, listen carefully for plurals. If the answer is dogs and you write dog, you're not going to get that point, and that's a shame because you've obviously followed the lecture and you deserve it. All right, that is the end of our listening lesson. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit like and subscribe for new lessons every Friday. Plus, if you go to our main website, you'll find links to over 100 podcast episodes that I've done with another examiner. You'll find links to all of my blog posts. Plus, you'll be able to find our full video library and all the courses that we offer. I'm Shelly. This is my IELTS Classroom. Have a great week. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you found the content useful, please click like to help the channel, and don't forget to subscribe for new lessons every Friday. Plus, you can find more expert content at www.myieltsclassroom.com.